In 1995, a man named McArthur Wheeler walked into two Pittsburgh banks in broad daylight and robbed them. No mask, no disguise, nothing. Just his bare face staring directly into the security cameras. When the police arrested him later that night, Wheeler was genuinely shocked. He couldn't understand how they'd identified him. "But I wore the juice," he kept saying. The juice, it turned out, was lemon juice. Wheeler had read that lemon juice could be used as invisible ink. And he'd reasoned, and this is a direct quote from the police report, that if lemon juice worked as invisible ink on paper, then rubbing it on his face would make his face invisible to cameras. He'd even tested it. He rubbed lemon juice on his face, took a Polaroid of himself, and, somehow, concluded that it had worked. When psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger at Cornell University heard about McArthur Wheeler, they didn't just laugh, they got curious. Because Wheeler wasn't crazy. His IQ was normal. He wasn't on drugs. He just genuinely, sincerely believed something that was catastrophically wrong. And he was too incompetent to know he was incompetent. This is the Dunning-Kruger Effect. In 1999, Dunning and Kruger designed a series of experiments to test a simple but profound hypothesis. People who are bad at something don't just perform badly. They're also bad at judging how badly they performed. They lack the very skill needed to recognize their own lack of skill. Here's how they proved it. They gave Cornell undergraduates tests in 3 areas: humor, grammar, and logical reasoning. Nothing subjective. Humor was tested by having professional comedians rate the funniness of jokes, and students were scored on how closely their ratings matched the experts. Grammar was a standard test. Logic was logic. After each test, before seeing their scores, the students were asked one question: how well do you think you did compared to everyone else? The results were astonishing. The students who scored in the bottom 25%, the worst performers, didn't think they were below average. They thought they were above average. Way above. On the humor test, the bottom quartile estimated they'd scored in the 60th percentile. In reality, they were in the 12th. On grammar, bottom scorers estimated 67th percentile. Actual, 14th. On logic, they estimated 61st. Actual, 13th. These weren't small miscalculations. The gap between perceived and actual performance was enormous. The worst performers were operating under a double burden. Not only were they incompetent, they were incompetent at recognizing their incompetence. Meanwhile, the top performers, the students in the top quartile, did something strange in the opposite direction. They underestimated themselves. They knew they'd done well, but they assumed everyone else had done just as well. It didn't occur to them that their performance was exceptional. Dunning and Kruger captured this in a now famous graph. On the x-axis, actual performance from worst to best. On the y-axis, perceived performance. The bottom scorer's self-assessment line starts absurdly high. The top scorer's line sits modestly low. And somewhere in the middle, around actual competence, the two lines finally meet. But here's the really important part. And this is what most people get wrong about the Dunning-Kruger effect. The popular understanding is, stupid people think they're smart. That's not quite right. Dunning and Kruger didn't study intelligence. They studied specific skills. Someone can be a brilliant physicist and still fall prey to the Dunning-Kruger effect in areas where they're incompetent. The effect isn't about being a generally stupid person. It's about being incompetent in a specific domain and not knowing enough about that domain to recognize your own incompetence. The problem is metacognition, thinking about your own thinking. To know how bad you are at grammar, you need to know what good grammar looks like. If you can't recognize good grammar, you can't recognize your own bad grammar either. This has a hopeful corollary. In the original study, Dunning and Kruger gave the bottom performers a short training session on the skill they'd just bombed. Then they asked them to re-rate themselves. The training didn't just improve their actual skill, it drastically improved their self-assessment accuracy. Their confidence dropped. They suddenly realized, oh, I was way worse than I thought. Knowledge is the cure. The moment you start learning about something, you begin to understand how much you don't know. Which is why the Dunning-Kruger effect is at its most dangerous not in true beginners, but in people who know just enough to be confident and not enough to be competent. You see it everywhere. The guy who watched one YouTube video on investing and now gives stock advice at parties. The first-year med student who diagnoses everyone in their family. The person who read half a Wikipedia article and now argues with actual experts. But the Dunning-Kruger effect isn't just about other people. It's about you. Right now, in some area of your life, you are probably more confident than you should be. And you don't know where. That's the whole point. So how do you protect yourself? First, seek out specific feedback. Not, "Am I good at this?" That invites vague reassurance. Ask, "What specifically am I doing wrong?" The more precise the feedback, the harder it is for your brain to dismiss it. Second, compare yourself to expert work, not to the average. Most people benchmark themselves against whoever happens to be around them. If you're the best guitarist in your friend group, you might feel like a rock star. But spend 10 minutes watching a professional guitarist on YouTube, and suddenly your confidence adjusts to something closer to reality. Third, pay attention to how much you don't know. The surest sign that you're on the wrong side of the Dunning-Kruger curve is that you never feel confused. If everything seems simple and obvious, you probably don't understand it deeply enough to see the complexity. And finally, get comfortable with the phrase, "I don't know." It's the most underrated sentence in the English language. Every expert says it constantly. Every novice is afraid to say it at all. McArthur Wheeler spent months telling everyone in prison about his incredible, invisible juice discovery. He was genuinely, sincerely baffled that the justice system had failed him. He never did understand what he'd done wrong. Don't be McArthur Wheeler. If you think you're great at something, ask yourself, "Do I know enough to know how bad I am?" Because if the answer is no, you probably have your answer.